Hello senators and legates. Welcome to Total War Tactics. Today we're going to take a closer look at a tactic which has shown to be very effective in real life. But now we need to figure out if it's good enough for Total War. As you can see, we're going to be doing this in Rome 2 with the Divide Et Impera mod enabled. We're going to be covering a tiny bit of historical context, the theoretical formation and how to execute it, the army composition, how to use it in game, and lastly but not least, how to defeat it. If there are any parts of the video you want to see, there are timestamps in the description for you to use. But with that said, let's introduce the tactic. If you haven't heard of the Triplex Acies formation before, you might have lived under a rock. Translated to triple battle order, the Triplex Acies was the typical deployment formation for the Roman army during the Republican era. If not, it was the Triplex Acies formation, they would just deploy in something at least similar enough for it. During the Chameleon system, they were fighting with spears just like the Greek hoplites, but during the Polybian reform it all changed into the Rome 2 version at the beginning, where they're using the gladius sword. The tactic was extremely successful, mainly due to their equipment and psychology of the Roman soldiers. It sadly fell out of fashion for the Romans, as it required a high level of professionalism and training to perform, which diminished over the years as Rome ran into several civil wars, forcing the Romans to use decentralized armies instead with much more simplified tactics. Though it is not being used today, it's still being studied at military school and colleges to this day. But fasten your seatbelts, as we need to take a closer look at the formation and exactly how they did it. Okay, so there are many things we need to cover here, so let's go over this as it happens in the battle. At the front we have the velites, a group of skirmishers who would throw as many javelins as they could while the infantry deployed behind them. The mentioned infantry would deploy in 3 lines, with distance between each maniple. And I'm not going to explain what a maniple is, but basically it's supposed to grant the army more flexibility and maneuverability. The first line were occupied by the Hastati, who contained the poorest and youngest men of the Republic. And behind them were the Principes, the second rank. They were fairly wealthy, meaning they would be able to buy decent equipment, making them the heavier infantry of the legion. But last, and certainly not least, the Triarii, the oldest and wealthiest men in the army, were equipped with spears and were thought to be the elites of the Roman legion. These guys were tough. I mean, they even had a saying in Rome, just translated to English, returning to the Triarii, which basically indicates you were in a desperate situation. That was the formation, but now let's go over to the execution part here. Whenever the velites were forced back, they would run in between the gaps of the first line, and may I just indicate how smart this was. If the first rank was one massive line, the velites would either be forced to run around, which would take a really long time, or go straight through the formation, where the latter part here could confuse the individual legionary soldier on why people are falling back and basically lower morale. So they completely removed this problem by just having gaps in the first line. After the velites had run through, the Hastati would form a single line to engage the enemy. Although this is not a fact, well, it is the great belief, but there are also a few sources mentioning them fighting with the gaps between each maniple. but we're just gonna go with them forming a single line as it makes the most sense, as there wouldn't be any gaps in the front line. But when the Hastati eventually routed, they would follow the same system as the Velites, but just run all the way back to the Triari. There's that saying again. And finally, when the Principes withdrew as well, the Triari would take over, which happened more often than you would think. They were truly the backbone of the Roman army. And then if the Hastati or Principes rallied, they would join the fight alongside the Triari and probably win the battle. I also want to add how the Roman army wouldn't stick to this formation no matter what. They would usually adapt their formation to the terrain and enemy. But damn, that was quite a lot, wasn't it? But let's move over to the army composition so we can fight this properly. So for when we are gonna test this out, we are not gonna use Rome, as that is all too obvious. Also because Sindegi Leonard, sorry if I didn't say that right, you asked for us to do this with different factions, so you're welcome. But for this video here we're gonna be using the Averni, and Yoshuk on the other hand, our opponent for today, are gonna be using the Massalians. For the units itself we're gonna need a lot of infantry. To be exact, 5 light or medium infantry at the front, 5 heavy infantry at the center, and 3 very heavy spearmen, if available, for the third line. Skirmishers, we need 4 javelin men and 3 cavalrymen as the last thing, among one of them being our general. And as the Roman legion also had a lot of allied troops among them, like the Etruscans and Samnites, then we're gonna take 2 units of each line and make them a different unit than the others. So let's begin at the top of the formation, where we are gonna choose 4 Gallic youth skirmishers. They are nothing special, they're just gonna be there for the javelin part. But next up we have the first line, where we are gonna need 3 Gallic heavy axemen and 2 Gallic clubmen. Second line is gonna be 3 late Oathsworn units and 2 Gallic nobles. And then last we're gonna have the 3 spearmen, and we chose 1 early Gallic nobles unit as well as 2 veteran freemen to do that job. The cavalry is just gonna be 2 Gallic nobles units and a royal horseman for our general. But with the army chosen, let's see what we can do with it. With our formation set, we just had to move forward and execute the tactic. Yoshuk had formed up with many men in reserve as well, while he had 4 cavalry units to our right, one of them being his general. We had a small skirmish with our javelins, but as we deployed our first line, his peltasts ran back. The close combat engagement was about to begin. After a lot of tough pressure on our right clubman unit, they completely routed. Not wanting our first line to be outnumbered and outflanked, I decided to pull them back and do a counter attack with our heavy Oathsworn units. Our Oathsworn were doing a good job at cutting through his front line, but at this point his cavalry had harassed our right flank for a long time. We therefore decided to support that flank with our third line. Meanwhile, he was using his reserves to encircle our position, and with everything in place, he charged from all sides. Surrounded and unable to endure his relentless charges, all men routed, unable to do any serious damage to his army. So, you might be thinking, what the fuck, why did you lose? Are you really that bad? And the answer is maybe, but the tactic definitely have major flaws for Total War, which I will go over now. The first flaw is that this tactic is hoping to grind out the enemy forces, but in a game where they are trying to balance out units, that's just not gonna happen. Second, the formation is super narrow compared to most factions, making it easy to be surrounded, and when your units take major morale penalties from being outflanked, they rout really easily. This actually leads me into number 3. When you eventually get surrounded, your second and third line must go out to block it. But if they are all the way out there, they won't be able to take over, for the first line will break at some point, as they already have taken too many casualties from being outflanked at the beginning. This leaves a major gap in the center of your formation, which completely destroys your tactic. And why do I know this? Well, we fought 4 different battles with 4 different factions every time. The first battle, Averni vs Massalia, which you just saw, we got outflanked, the center broke down and we lost. Second battle, Sparta vs the Odrysians, with pikemen as the front line. Outflanked, center broke down, we lost. Third battle, Atropat Khan vs the Massagetae, where your Shuk mainly were using the infantry, and that's not good for the Massagetaeans. That's really bad, they're a cavalry faction. But guess what? We were outflanked, the center broke down and we lost. The fourth and last battle, we were playing as the Romans versus the Scordisi. And guess what happened? We were outflanked, the center broke down and we lost. Now you might just be thinking, why doesn't it work in Total War when it worked so well in real life, as you just talked about earlier? And that is basically because in real life, whenever Rome used the formation, they fought tribes who barely had any decent equipment compared to the Roman legion. Also, definitely because the enemies usually didn't use proper tactics, but instead just fought them head on, which an actual person would never do in Rome 2. And whenever they actually fought someone smart like Hannibal, they lost by being outflanked. But when they finally won against Hannibal, for example, at the Battle of Zama, they didn't use the basic Triplex Acies formation, but instead used a different variation of it. That's one we might use for another point, but it's not gonna be used today. And I also want to point out, whenever they fought the Greeks, they only won because of them fighting in terrain unsuitable to pike and hoplite formations. There are a few more things that make this bad for Rome 2, such as outmatched cavalry and bad skirmishers, but that should also be it. I'm a bit sad the tactic didn't work out in Total War, but the hard truth is that it's just not suitable for a game. I will say though, it clearly works against the AI, as I've proven time and time again in the Books of Rome campaign. So if you want to see it work, you should check it out. But if you have any other suggestions for new tactics, I would like to hear about them in the comment section below. But with that said, I would like to say thank you so very much for watching, and till the next time everybody, see ya.